After the dissolution of the band Pantera in the year 2003, the guitarist Dimebag Darrell formed a new group, Damageplan, and the promising band was gaining fame at a great speed. With the release of their first album came live performances, although with them also came some inconveniences. At a concert in Columbus, Ohio, an angry attendee tried to sneak onto the stage. The frantic man kept making a vehement claim that Pantera had stolen his lyrics. Fortunately, the individual was quickly expelled from the venue, escorted by security personnel, and although he managed to knock down a lighting platform, causing an estimated $2,000 in damages, the concert was able to proceed as planned. In fact, the band's lead singer even joked about the incident during the show. But the disturbed individual wouldn't stay quiet after the incident. On the contrary, he would return shortly to continue causing disturbances. The band didn't want to press charges against him in an attempt to avoid the tedious court hearings that would have entailed. Leaving the fact behind, on December 8th of 2004, Damageplan performed at the Rosa Villa nightclub in Columbus in the state of Ohio. But on this occasion, the unbalanced troublemaker began to prowl around the vicinity of the place. After 10 o'clock at night, he climbed a 3-meter high metal fence and managed to sneak into the establishment. His feat did not go unnoticed. He was quickly spotted and pursued by security personnel. Still, he kept running towards the band, who were already performing the first song of their repertoire, Britain New Life. The absorbed Darrell was playing his guitar, at that moment fulfilling his childhood dream. He had finally become a rock star. What the musician didn't know was that this very dream was about to cost him his life. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. What were Dimebag Darrell's early years like? What were the motives that drove his killer to commit such a massacre at the place? Why, were Dimebag's last words Van Halen? Is it true that Phil Anselmo was banned from entering his funeral? Well, to answer these questions, let's go back to December 8th, 2004, the day Dimebag Darrell died. Darrell Lance Abbott was born on August 20th, 1966, in Ennis, Texas, United States. From his family, he had contact with music. His father, Jerry Abbott, was a country music producer. So at a very early age, young Darrell began to step into recording studios. And there he could listen to great bluesmen from the region like Bax Henderson and Jimmy Wallace. And it was in those studios where a deep longing began to form inside him. He wanted to play an instrument. At first he started with his brother Vincent Paul Abbott's drums. But at the age of 12, he decided to fully commit to the electric guitar, initially playing Deep Purple songs. Although after country, he began to delve into the style of bands like Zest Top and Lynyrd Skynyrd. And there were particularly two groups that reaffirmed his passion for heavy music, Kiss and Van Halen. A new dream then shook his spirit. He no longer just wanted to play an instrument, but also to become a rock star. One like those he had begun to admire so much. He quickly began to compete in various guitar contests in his state, sometimes made up of more than 100 people of all ages. In one of them, he even won a guitar, Dim, Major League. Unfortunately, he was soon prohibited from participating further. Was it perhaps due to bad behavior? Was there some kind of problem with his performance? The answer is in fact hilarious. The young musician had won so many times that they thought it wasn't fair for him to keep competing. But none of this could stop him. And at the age of 16, along with his aforementioned brother Vinny, he decided to consolidate his skills and showcase his talent by creating his own band. It was the year 1981, and in the city of Arlington, Texas, a band was about to be born that would change everything. With Vinnie Paul on drums, Donny Hart on vocals, Tommy Bradford on bass, and Terry Terrence Lee Glaze, along with Dar Abbott on guitars. A new band was formed, Pantera. The band began playing covers and original compositions in nightclubs, with a style close to glam metal. At first, the group struggled to define its style, releasing several albums that did not achieve great commercial success, such as Metal Magic, Projects in the Jungle, and I Am the Night. Later on, over the years, they also experienced some changes in the lead singer. Until 1987, when Phil Anselmo would become the lead singer. The following year, they released their new album titled Power Metal. This work, aided by Anselmo's rough and powerful voice, marked a turn towards a sound that fused 80s hard rock with the then emerging thrash metal. After the release of Power Metal, Darrell, who by then was known as Dimebag Darrell, auditioned for an already famous metal band, the one led by Dave Mustaine, Megadeth. However, he demanded a requirement for his incorporation. His brother, Vinnie Paul, had to join him on the drums. Since Megadeth already had a fixed drummer, Darrell ultimately could not be chosen and could not play in the band. Perhaps he was fortunate, as in 1990 with the release of Cowboys from Hell, Pantera solidified its reputation in the scene. The transformation of the sound was radical, definitely adopting a heavier and more aggressive style. This evolution was largely driven by Darrell's powerful guitar riffs. The tours for the album presentation began, and they eventually got to open for prominent bands like Metallica, AC/DC, and Judas Priest. By 1992, Pantera would completely transform the scene with the release of Vulgar, Display of Power, an album that redefined the sound of metal, and it established them as pioneers of what would later be known as groove metal. With explosive riffs and unprecedented violence, their music led them to share the stage with metal legends like Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden. The following year, Darrell would no longer be known as Dimebag Darrell to adopt the name that would accompany him in the following years, Dimebag Darrell. The next album, Far Beyond Driven, debuted at number 1 on Billboard and on the Australian charts. But in the following years, Anselmo would start to suffer from health problems and addictions, even suffering an overdose due to heroin. In 1996, these events would severely impact the band's internal relationships. Meanwhile, Dimebag Darrell, his brother Vinnie Paul, and bassist Rex Brown joined country music vocalist David Allan Coe to form the project. Rebel meets Rebel in 1988 by the year 2003. The differences between the members of Pantera were already irreconcilable. Darrell and his brother had conflicts with Anselmo, which ultimately led to the dissolution of the group. But Dimebag wouldn't stand idly by. The following year, he would form, along with Beanie, a new metal band. The group, called Damage Plan, used part of Pantera's sound and combined it with influences from thrash, nu metal, and post-grunge, with Patrick Lackman as the vocalist and Bob Silla on the bass. Quickly, Damage Plan debuted with their first album and began to gain popularity that led them to headline new tours. The guitarist had reinvented himself in the blink of an eye, which ended up confirming what everyone already knew. Was Darrell here to stay? Or so they thought. Sadly, a tragedy would halt that meteoric career. And that's how our story comes back to the beginning. On December 8th, 2004, Damage Plan performed at the Rosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio. The audience was eager to hear them play. Unfortunately, they couldn't do it. A few seconds after the show had started, another absolutely horrific scene unfolded at the venue. A man armed with a 9mm pistol managed to sneak in from the side of the stage, opening fire on the body of a member, specifically Dimebag Darrell. The musician was hit by a total of 5 point-blank bullets. The audience took a while to realize what was really happening. At first, they thought everything that was happening was part of the show. Meanwhile, the frenzied attacker was shouting and hurling insults that made clear the motive for his sinister actions. He blamed Dimebag and his brother for the breakup of Pantera. He then attacked 5 other people who tried to intervene to help the musician and stop the massacre. He managed to kill 3 and seriously injure 2 before taking the drum technician of Damage Plan hostage. During the massacre, there was another intervention, that of nurse Mindy Reese, a 28-year-old fan who tried to save Darrell's life through cardiopulmonary resuscitation maneuvers. Unfortunately, it was already too late. The 38-year-old musician had instantly lost his life. The staff at the location acted quickly and emergency services were present. Upon arriving at the site, Officer James D. Neigemeyer encountered a nightmarish scene. The agitated shooter was out of his mind and had no intention of abandoning his murderous task. With no other choice, Niedermeyer opened fire with his shotgun and shot him in the back of the head. The other 3 people who lost their lives in the attack were Nathan Bray, a 23-year-old fanatic who was shot in the chest, Aaron Hulk, a 29-year-old club employee who was victim to 6 shots, and Jeff Mayhem Thompson, who was 40 years old, the Pantera security guard, who was gunned down in the chest, back, and thigh. The band's drum technician John Brooks, who tried to subdue the attacker, and the tour manager Chris Paluska were injured. The next day, numerous rock figures expressed their dismay at what had happened, offering all kinds of farewell words, reflection, and comfort. In addition, hundreds of messages were shared on the band's site, while fans came forward to leave flowers and cards. In front of the brothers' house, Abbot Vinny, the brother of the late Darrell, quickly expressed the following words, laden with deep pain. With all his greatness and achievements on the guitar, Dimebag will be missed more for his personality, his charisma, his care for others, his love, and, above all, his heart. Twice as big as the entire state of Texas, Dimebag gave his all every day for each one of us. Thank you all for supporting us in this time of immense loss. 6 days after the tragic event, it was time to say the final goodbye to the beloved guitarist. December 14th, 2004. The Darrell family and a large number of friends from the music scene gathered at the Moore Memorial Gardens Cemetery in Arlington, Texas. Ozzy Osbourne, Tommy Iommi, Rob Zombie, Zakk Wylde, Corey Taylor, and Dave Mustaine, among others, came to the place to give the artist the last goodbye. Jim Simons and Paul Steinley, members of the iconic band Kiss, whose musical influence had significantly marked the beginnings of Darren, made a curious but emotional gift to the family, an original coffin from the band. Another of the famous figures that marked the beginnings of the deceased musician had a gesture full of sentimentality. Eddie Van Halen requested that one of his most iconic guitars be buried with Dimebag's body. Darrell had asked his colleague in life to sell him a replica of that same model. Unfortunately, this did not materialize, so Van Halen decided to give him the original so it could go with him. After uttering the words, "He was an original, and only an original deserves the original guitar," both musicians had become friends, and even upon meeting him, Darrell had commented that at that moment he didn't care about dying because finally he had shaken the hand of the man who had inspired him to start playing the guitar. In fact, Van Halen were the last words spoken by the guitarist. The reason? Dimebag and his brother Vinny had a personal secret code. When they were having a good time and feeling really happy, they would shout those words at each other moments before going on stage that fateful day. That was the last exchange between the brothers and the last thing that came out of the musician's throat. And what about Vinny? With a broken heart, he gave a moving speech that ended with the phrase, "Rest in peace, brother Dime." Another notable participant in the ceremony was Jerry Cantrell, guitarist for Alice in Chains, who paid tribute to Darrell by performing 2 acoustic songs, one of them in a folk style. But despite the large number of attendees, there was one absence that was more than noticeable, that of vocalist Phil Anselmo. The reason? Had he been blacklisted by Darrell's family? Days later, the singer would claim to be deeply regretful for not attending the funeral, speculating that perhaps no one would have stopped him had he shown up. He said that while he respected the family's wishes, he regretted not being there to say goodbye in a positive manner. To the person he called his brother, for 17 years, the most damn beautiful person and one of his best friends in the world. He expressed sympathy for the band members and the world that loved Dimebag Darrell, knowing there would never be another like him. He also remembered the Damageplan drum technician, assuring that he had taken a bullet for him. Finally, he stressed that the media and heavy metal magazines maliciously fueled the existing conflict, ultimately destroying Pantera. After the death of his former colleague, the distressed artist wished he could have silenced people's rumors. He believed that if he had done so, everything would have been different. His exact words were, "We could have come together and recovered together." For Vinny and for everyone in Pantera. Because I've looked back and those were my people, they were my people, and I was theirs. There is love in my heart. Following the funeral, Dimebag Darrell was laid to rest at Moore Memorial Garden Cemetery in Arlington, Texas. His grave bore a poignant epitaph. He came to rock and rocked like no other, with a heart twice the size of Texas. Our beloved brother, companion, mentor, idol, and friend, we love you until we meet again. Darrell's departure left a deep wound in his fans and loved ones. A loss even more painful, considering that his life was taken by a man who claimed to be his admirer. The attacker, later identified as Nathan Gale, fired a total of 15 shots before being taken down. The massacre could have been even more tragic. Gale still had a half-full magazine and also had 30 additional bullets in his possession at the time of his death. The man was only 25 years old, had developed a strong addiction to drugs, and lived with his mother, who often heard him say that he was being heavily watched. He had enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, and as a Christmas gift, his mother had given him the item that, ironically, would lead him to his own downfall, a weapon. He was discharged from the Marine Corps soon after. The reasons why he was no longer part of the Corps shed some more light on his actions. The young man had been discharged due to severe episodes of paranoid schizophrenia. In addition, he had a deeply rooted and almost sick obsession. He had been a die-hard fan of Pantera since high school. His fixation with the band was so intense that his acquaintances felt overwhelmed by how constant it was the topic of his conversations. Some other friends had distanced themselves from him by then, alerted by his strange overall behavior. One of them even reported that Gale was having conversations with himself and an imaginary dog. Sometimes he reached the most delirious limits, constantly oscillating between love and hate. He had even shown a friend of his song lyrics that belonged to the group, assuring him that they were actually his own. He threatened to sue them for plagiarism. He even claimed that the members of the band were trying to steal his identity. He was troublesome and was not without a criminal record either. Repeatedly sleeping in public parks, skateboarding in a well-known chain of stores, receiving stolen goods at a job, and driving with a suspended license were some of his past offenses. While there were those who claimed to have heard Gale shouting that Darrell had broken up Pantera, a police investigation determined that there was no evidence to suggest that the shooting was motivated by this. In this regard, Finn Anselmo was the target of harsh criticism and even blame for the incident. This was due to a statement he made in an interview prior to the shooting, where he claimed that Dimebag deserved to be severely beaten. No evidence of this was found. There were no signs that Gale had been aware of the controversial interview. However, the incident blew up any possibility of a Pantera reunion, as from that moment on, Vinnie Paul refused to have any contact with Anselmo. However, the band eventually found a way to bounce back. Officer Niggenmeyer, who managed to take down the attacker, was not only cleared of all charges, but also received the Distinguished Law Enforcement Valor Award and was named Law Enforcement Officer of the Year 2005. 2 years later, he retired from his position due to a post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis. As a result of the event, he was transferred to another division and had to receive psychological treatment for years. The tragedy once again brought to the table the debate that always reappears in the United States: gun ownership. On June 22, 2018, fans of Pantera were shocked when Vinnie Paul passed away at his Las Vegas home. The musician was buried next to the grave of his mother and his beloved brother. Dimebag Darrell Pantera has been recognized as one of the most influential bands in the history of heavy metal and hard rock. It has appeared on various prestigious lists. TV placed it in 5th place in its ranking of the 10 best heavy metal bands of all time, and VH1 positioned it at 45 in the top 100 best hard rock bands. Dimebag Darrell has been included more than once among the top 10 metal guitarists, frequently appearing in magazines and even having his own column in Guitar World magazine. After his death, he received all kinds of tributes from numerous programs and colleagues who dedicated everything from songs to videos and shows in his memory. For the year 2022, Phil Anselmo and Rex Brown announced a Pantera tour, with Zakk Wylde and Charlie Benante replacing the deceased Darrell and Vinnie. Currently, the band is active and performing shows, although it has been the subject of controversy due to Anselmo's racist comments and sympathy towards Nazism. The death of Dimebag Darrell was a tragedy that left a deep mark on the heavy metal community. A community that remembers December 8th as one of the most tragic and dark days in the history of the genre.